So it's very exciting that we get to hear about these projects tonight. I think from the perspective of UNF, this again is a great example of what we have always hoped to provide for the Northeast Florida community and hope to continue to do so into the future. So without further ado, I get the honor of being able to invite the first project to the stage here. So Brian and Sarah for the Cathedral Arts Project will be our first interns to discuss the project. So thank you all. I think they're here. I can't really see, but, oh, okay.
Having worked as a teacher, I know that the joy in the job comes from the everyday, ordinary, great moments. What is an ordinary, everyday, great moment? It's that moment when a student smiles, just happy to be back at school, or when a parent goes out of their way to thank you for helping their child, or when you have an academic breakthrough with a student. A recent ordinary, everyday, great moment for Dr. Green, the superintendent of Duval County Public Schools, is when she had the opportunity to meet William Bell. William is a violinist from Riverside High School and recently had the opportunity to perform at Carnegie Hall. Later, when Dr. Green and William met at a school board meeting, it was William who, being so used to the limelight and fame from his artistic abilities, took control of the situation, instructing Dr. Green on how to be posed just perfectly for the photographs. Dr. Green later described William as charming, charismatic, and talented. For Dr. Green, this was her great moment. For our research, we are working with the Cathedral Arts Project, or CAP for short. CAP began as a dance class for 10 students at the St. John's Cathedral and has now grown to have nearly every arts discipline and has reached out to more than 30,000 children in Duval County. Remember William from before? He is a CAP alum. CAP's mission is to empower every student's creative spirit, to elevate arts educators in their field, and to advocate for arts access and equity. For this project, we are focusing on the issue of equity. According to a survey of Duval County principals, 53% of principals responded that they spend between 1 cent and $3.99 per student in their arts classes. This is essentially the cost of a box of crayons and some paper for an entire school year. In the state of Florida, art is not a core subject. Since art is not a core subject, there is no minimum standard that must be met by schools in regards to their arts program. And since there's no minimum standard, some schools may have greater access to arts than others. However, since it is CAP's mission to advocate for equity in the arts, they have partnered with Duval County Public Schools by developing their LEAD survey, or Landscape of the Arts in Duval. This survey began back in the 2018 school year, and CAP is proud to announce that in the most recent school year, they had a 100% response rate. CAP's aim is to use this survey to create a data-informed scoring system that can guide schools on how best to improve their arts programs.
Okay, I hope you all can hear me. I'm taking over from
yes,
here.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so Florida DSSG partnered with CAP to help facilitate their goals for broadening access to arts in Duval County Public Schools. So the initial goal for this project was to assess how equitable arts programming is across schools in the system. And to better develop an understanding of how different components of art engagement may vary across schools, and to summarize which areas are thriving and which areas should be the focus for future improvement. To assist CAP in guiding arts access in schools, we also plan to provide data-driven insights for optimizing their current survey to fit Duval County, and to provide recommendations for developing an arts in schools scoring system designed for Jacksonville schools. CAP provided us with data from their lead survey, which received a 100% response rate for the 2020-2021 school year. The survey covered many topics regarding arts programming in schools, including whether the schools had partnerships with community arts organizations, whether they conducted community engagement activities such as theater productions and music concerts, and the types and number of arts courses available to students. Additionally, we obtained data from Duval County Public Schools and the Florida Department of Education, which provided information about things like achievement test scores, demographics, and behavioral incidents. To summarize, the data available for our analyses were from the 2020 to 2021 school year and included 159 total schools and over 50 variables about school characteristics. Because we had plenty of data to work with, the first step was to identify which measures to use and to calculate summary variables to use in analyses. This also involved cross-checking related variables and verifying the validity of the measures that we selected. We did have some missing values, either due to skipped responses to survey questions or certain schools missing from public records. To deal with this, we used statistical methods to estimate the missing values. We also made sure to identify arts magnet schools and non-traditional schools and excluded them from our analyses. Finally, middle and high schools showed different characteristics from elementary schools, so we conducted separate analyses on middle and high and elementary schools. One of the primary goals of our analysis was to reduce the complexity of the data. So one method for doing this is using factor analysis, which identifies variables with common patterns. So factor analysis allows us to condense all of the measures down into factors, which show unique patterns across the variables. So in this example, factor analysis identified that measure 1 has similar patterns to measure 3 and 4. So it grouped them into one summary factor. Common patterns were also identified between measures 2, 5, and 6. So these were grouped as a second factor. So that means that the data is condensed from 6 measures down to 2, which simplifies our ability to understand the patterns in the data. Latent class analysis works in a similar way. But instead of condensing the measures into factors, it finds groupings of schools or classes that have similar characteristics. So in this example, the analysis identified similarities between the schools in Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3, and sorted them into groups with unique characteristics. These are the results of our factor analysis that we performed for middle and high schools. What we found is that there were 2 factors that were strongly related to arts programming in the schools, but in different ways. Factor 1 was related to internal arts education measures, like arts classes taken per student and student-to-teacher ratios. Factor 3, on the other hand, was more related to external arts activities, like field trips and developing community partnerships. So after simplifying the data into these factors, we wanted to look at how they related to equity in arts programs across DCPS. We found patterns that show clear disparity in the levels of internal arts education, higher percentages of economically disadvantaged students, and higher percentages of students identifying with a minority status were associated with lower levels of internal arts education. So based on these striking patterns, it's very clear that CAP is doing important work in the community by trying to increase arts access for all students. We also looked at associations between arts education and behavioral outcomes, and we found that higher levels of arts education was associated with higher attendance rates and lower rates of discipline incidents. These patterns may involve additional underlying factors that weren't involved in these analyses, but they suggest a relationship between exposure to arts and positive student outcomes. Similarly, we found positive associations between achievement test scores and higher levels of internal arts education. This association was particularly strong for language arts and science test scores, and this is for middle and high schools. In elementary schools, we found the same patterns, but the factor that showed these relationships was actually related to external arts activities like field trips and partnerships. So this association for elementary schools was most pronounced specifically for language arts test scores. So all of this together allows us to draw one possible conclusion from the analysis that internal arts education may be particularly important as students get older, but elementary school students may see unique benefits from exposure to arts in the community outside the classroom. And with that, I'll hand it back to Brian to discuss the latent class analysis.
Using latent class analysis, this is a statistical method that allows us to measure different arts variables along with different social and demographic variables. We took into account factors like engagement, partnership, governance, as well as school test scores, discipline rates, attendance rates, and more. We did this splitting up both for middle and high school and for elementary school. Here's just an example of how the elementary school broke down. Class 1, we'll call it the Accomplish More with Less. What's interesting about this group is that they scored the highest in relation to all arts metrics. They had high engagement, high partnerships, and high governance. But what's interesting is that they reported very low funding, or at least not multiple sources of funding. Group 2, we'll call it the Balanced Arts and Academics. This group scored the highest in relation to elementary school test scores and had pretty high arts programs in general. Group 3, we can call the Hidden Talent. Hidden Talent scored a little bit lower in relation to arts metrics and were more affected by students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds and minority backgrounds. Using the latent class analysis, we were able to gain perspective onto the different characteristics that differentiate schools in Duval County. Then, with factor analysis, we were able to figure out the indicators that showed the overall health of an arts program. Using these two in pair, we're able to create some recommendations to improve the survey and to develop a scoring system moving forward for CAP. While the characteristics that are necessary for the survey are different for both elementary school and high school, we'll just give a few general recommendations for this case. One is we would like to see more information on the types of fundings that schools have. For example, did they rely solely on their district funding, or did their PTA rally to gather funds, or did principals go out and seek grants in the community? Also, we would like to have more information on the number of arts classes taken. For example, with the current question with elementary schools, they ask, what percentage of students have taken an art class? Well, in the case of elementary schools, nearly 100% of students have taken an arts class. So maybe in order to increase the robustness of this question, we say, how many arts classes did a school take? Did they take a visual arts class or a dance class, for example? So on the horizon for CAP, we would like to suggest that they continue to collect more data, optimize their survey based on some of the recommendations that we've made, guide schools in order to make year-to-year improvements, and we can work towards having equal access in the arts in Duval County. Thank you.